Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about happiness and time. Why does time seem to pass more quickly as we get older? How can we make time slow down? What are some ways we can use our time more wisely? We're talking about all these things and more on today's episode. Let's get started. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, Mindy.
Hey, Marie.
Listeners, today we're continuing our Happier at Home book series. This is a book written by best-selling author Gretchen Rubin, designed to make our homes places of greater simplicity, comfort, and love. The book tackles one topic related to happiness each month from September through May. Last month in episode 63, we talked about increasing happiness within ourselves, and this month we're talking about happiness and time. Mindy and Julie, I feel like the first month of a new decade is the perfect time to think about our use of time. And how did you feel about approaching this topic? Mindy, how did you feel?
It just seemed natural. Like it's something that I was already pondering. And so to read the book, take notes and meditate on do I like the way things are? Are there things I want to change about how I spend my days or my time? It just really was a natural fit.
Yeah. Julie, is that how you felt too?
Yeah, same for me, because in January, you're thinking about goals and habits. Mm-hmm. And a lot of mine revolved around the use of my time. I didn't really call them that, but they do. Right. Time is a big factor in those. So, yeah.
Well, something interesting that we read in the beginning of the chapter really stuck out to me. And you guys can tell me if it stuck out to you. So we've heard this many times. As we get older, time seems to pass more quickly. But I hadn't heard it quite in this way. Live as long as you may, the first 20 years are the longest half of your life. They appear so while they're passing, they seem to have been so when we look back on them, and they take up more room in our memory than all the years that succeed them. Research has also shown this to be true. People who live to be 80 years old, they feel like 71% of their life is done by the time they're 40, even though they actually have 40 years left. And the years between 60 and 80 feel like just 13% of life. How did you guys feel when you read this?
Oh, I loved it. I just thought I have always kind of felt this way, but didn't know it was a real thing.
Right.
And then I kind of started doing the math. I thought, well, if you're 10 years old, 5 years is half of your life. But
right.
To us, 5 years is just a blip.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think that's why it's hard for a kid to wait on Christmas. Don't you remember the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas break was an eternity?
Right. It was.
And now it's literally the blink of an eye, and it makes sense. I mean, that is like scientifically and mathematically, that even makes sense. Like a week is a bigger fraction of a child's life than it is ours. So it seems faster.
That's also why we hit a midlife crisis at 40. You think life's over. Like, is anything good going to happen to me after the age of 40? And of course, the three of us are here to talk about all of those wonderful feelings. And that, yes, there is a lot of life after 40. But it's ironic because I felt like my 20s were such a long stretch of time because I had all 4 children in my 20s. Ironically, I feel like that is something I think about a lot, or, I'm just so happy to be past that or whatever. So yes, the first 20 years of my life, but also in between 20 and 30 really took about 50 years of my life.
Yeah. The other thing I think about is like when I was having my first child, my mom seemed so distant from that. Like, how could she possibly remember that?
Yeah,
because in my timeline, that had been my whole life. And now that my daughter's had a baby, I can totally remember her as an infant, the day she was born and that whole first year of life. But that time since then has passed so quickly, but it's been Molly's whole life. So, you can see the different perspectives.
It definitely is true. All right. Well, one of the goals Gretchen Rubin had for this month was to create a feeling of unhurriedness. And she said that she suffered from the persistent delusion that once she got through the next 3 or 4 months, things would slow down. But they never did. And she realized that if she wanted a feeling of unhurriedness, she would have to create it now. I'm definitely guilty of that, of saying, oh, well, if I just get through the next 2 months, then things will slow down. but it never really happens. And Julie, I thought of your goal of creating more margin for 2020. So how did that go in January for you?
Yeah, I've definitely been trying to create more margin as a way to feel unhurried and to lengthen time. And I have a good example from this month. I got to take a trip with a friend that was kind of unexpected, planned last minute. And I flew back home on a Thursday, really, really tired. And I knew I had a full week coming up the next week. So the next day was Friday. I did my workout. Then we recorded a podcast. And then I got a shower, got in my PJs, and I did not get out of PJs until Sunday afternoon.
Woo! That is the best.
Yes.
And I have to say that John was out of town too. So this was even
perfect.
It was just me at home. I built a fire. I got my big comfy chair and I worked on some photo albums that I wanted to work on. I watched mindless, old TV reruns, listened to some podcasts, listened to music. And it got so bad one night I wanted Chinese food and I didn't even go out and get it. I had it delivered.
Yes. I was going to say DoorDash or something. Yeah. Good for you.
I'm not getting my clothes on to go get that. They can just bring it here. So it was really relaxing and refreshing. And, adding that trip in was really fun and spontaneous. I'm glad I did it. But without that margin between my return home and my busy next week, I probably would have regretted going.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that time because I never do that. And January just felt like a good time to do that.
What a great story, Julie. Good job.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, one of the ways that we can lengthen time and make it more rich and vivid is to have a new or challenging experience. So radical changes in life, like moving to a new city or switching careers, or as we talked about earlier, having a baby. When you guys look back at your life, what times stick out the most and what was happening in your life during those times?
Oh my gosh. Of course, I've already mentioned having the kids, but even really more than that, it's been our moves because we have consistently moved about every 5 years. Each move has been timely and unique and what it did for our family unit and the things that we learned in each place. I can look back at each particular location that we lived, the house that we lived, the ages of the children when we were there, the things the Lord taught us. And then he moved us on. Each place we learned valuable lessons. I categorize my life by the places I've lived, and you guys know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been some places that I categorize the whole thing like that was a tough place to be. It just was tough. And then there's other places like that was just pure blessing. Like the whole time, the people, the church, the everything. I do feel a little like the Israelites where he's like, go ahead and pitch your tents here. When the cloud ups and moves, follow me. And I have felt like that's been my life. When he ups and moves, we follow him and go someplace new.
Right. Well, one of the things it said was having babies. And when we had our first child, we had also just moved from New York State to Maryland. So the move was new. We also, like a few weeks before she was born, just bought our first home. So home ownership was new. There were so many new experiences in our life at that time. We only lived in that house for 15 months before we moved back to New York State. But those 15 months might as well have been 15 years in my mind. Right. I feel like I could go back to just about any day there and remember what I was doing and how I felt and our experiences because there were so many new things. Of course, when you have your first child, every little thing they do is new. So I could really relate to what she said about new experiences or challenging times, lengthening time. That happened also like when we moved from New York State to Tennessee. I mean, those first couple of years loom large in my mind, larger than if I had just been living in the same place this whole time.
Right.
Julie, you've had the experience of living mostly in the same place. How do you feel like what sticks out in your mind as you look back on your life?
Well, the two, other than childhood, the two biggest time periods that stick out are pharmacy school and John's residency, because those happened at the same time. That just seems like a big chunk of our life. And it was only 4 years, but that was a lot of hard work and studying and him being on call. And I loved that time. But up until that point, that was the hardest thing that we'd ever done.
Right.
And they were really fun because it wasn't quite real life yet. We were really involved in our church, had a lot of great friends, and it just has a lot of fond memories from that time. But, 4 years isn't that long, but it seemed like it took forever to get through residency and graduate and move on.
Mm-hmm.
The preschool years, which was our time in Memphis being married, that was a big chunk of time. We moved into our first house after John graduated. And then Molly turned 1 in that house. Mm-hmm. And I remember I kept a calendar her first year. It was a little baby calendar, just with the little squares. They weren't big spaces, but I wrote something in every day, just like,
oh, wow,
happy today. And some of them had stickers for like their first tooth and all that. And I did it every single day. And I've gotten that calendar out and I can remember, oh yeah, we went to the mall and went strolling because it was cold and snowy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember all of those memories.
Aww.
Yeah. So that time was just very slow,
Yes.
Right.
Raising kids and when especially before school, and then it picked up in school.
Yeah.
And now we've been in Nashville 20 years, and I can say like the last 10 have kind of been a blur.
Oh, wow.
All right. Well, we all have different priorities and values that we consider in the use of our time. So what goals or ideas around time did you guys focus on this month?
I was kind of intrigued by her idea of suffer 15 minutes a day, with the idea of kind of establishing a routine, because that's something that was on my 2020 goals, was better routines and habits. And she says that it works better to do something every day. And one way I've been trying to harness this power of routine was by making my bed every day, which you know about. That little habit has been going great, but I've been trying to apply that to bigger things now, to other projects and commitments that I have going on. I thought, I don't really consider the work I'm doing, it's nothing I'm getting paid for. It's fun work. I don't consider it suffering, but I do find it really hard for me to get started.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to think, okay, why is this? I think this is something she mentioned. My desire to create perfection or totally finish a project in one sitting prevents me from working at all.
Okay. Yeah.
I have started following this watercolor artist on Instagram and YouTube. And I notice a lot of artists do this. They'll put out this campaign and a challenge to get you to try to paint something every day for 30 days. And I used to think, oh, I couldn't do that. I don't have the time to commit to a painting that's worth my time, like something frameable and something I could give to someone. And that's not the point. They just want you to do it every day. And it kind of goes back to that idea of enjoying the journey, not the destination.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not always about enjoying the finished product, but maybe what you're learning in the process. Or, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I tend to want to just do something if it's going to be a perfect finished project and not value the steps that go along to get there. She said something really funny. She had a quote in the book and it said, "A small daily task, if it really be daily, will beat the labor of a spasmodic Hercules." And I thought, that is me to a T. I'm a spasmodic Hercules.
Yeah. I resonated with that too, Julie.
That is a really odd description, but I was like, oh, wow, that is me. I do things in bursts,
Right.
Yes. I really identified with her suffer for 15 minutes too. I really liked the idea that she would set a timer. So I really took it that far. One of the things that I've been wanting to get under control this year is my photo albums, and I cannot make myself go over to the computer, sign in, bring up the website and start. But she said, even on her first day, she set the timer. And I think all she managed to do was log on. But that was the 15 minutes. So that's really literally what I had to do. I set the timer on my phone and I sat there for 15 minutes. And by the end of the month, you guys, I finished a photo album.
Oh,
wow.
And loaded the pictures for a second one. I'm just decided that the suffering for 15 minutes, that's the only way I'm going to do it. Was the suffer for 15 minutes something that you looked at too, Mindy?
I was like, do I do this or do I not? And I did not do it because I thought about doing it and I just didn't want to suffer.
Okay.
At all. But I like the concept so much. It made so much sense. So the things that I chose were a little bit different. The first one was give Bryce my best. It seems simple, but he really is the one to suffer. Like I really will do everything I need to do and meet everybody else's needs and then be tired when he comes home. And so I wanted to give Bryce my best. The second one was get enough sleep.
Yeah.
That was actually important. I wanted to really hone down the time and get even more into a routine of going to bed at a good time, creating a good nighttime routine, and getting to bed by 10 o'clock, which meant that I actually started going up to my room at like 9 o'clock. The next one was I wanted to have more adventures in the dark and the cold. Our family tends to really stick inside a lot more in the winter months. And even though my boys are playing basketball and we go to basketball games and practices, I wanted to make sure we were still getting out, like let's go do something, even though it's dark and cold outside. I wanted to keep a good margin. I didn't want to just fill every moment with people or activity. And then when I was with people, I wanted to be present.
Yeah.
And then the last one was I wanted to practice self-control. I know we've talked about this in another month, but I did incorporate something new this month that I am loving. And I just feel really successful with this practicing self-control bit. So those are the things that I chose.
All right. Well, those are awesome.
That's a lot.
Yes, you were tackling a lot in January. Well, some other things that I looked at this month was streamlining tasks. There were some things that bothered me every time I had to do them, and they took extra time that I didn't need to spend if I would just take some time to think of a new way of doing them. And then my favorite thing about January is the feeling of extra time. The hurriedness of holidays is past us. It's a 31-day month. There, to me, is permission to waste time. And she kind of even talked about this a little bit in the book. The goal was not to make every moment productive. The goal was just to acknowledge how you're spending your time. And for me, in January, I give myself permission to waste some time. And that may sound really silly to people, but I just need it. And I look forward to it even while I'm going through the business of the holidays. I tell myself, well, in January, that's me time.
Yeah. Well, one of the things she says is that valuable activities don't always appear valuable. So maybe you shouldn't call it wasting. Like it's something you need, Maybe it's not a waste if it's something you value and it's going to refresh you. And you're not going to do that every month of the year.
It's like a gift of time.
Yes. So I watched more TV than I usually do. I read more books. I did not start any new projects. I think my personality is always to feel like I need to be thinking, well, what am I going to do next? And I didn't think about what I was going to do next. I just wanted to waste some time. So I love that about January.
One more thing that I did try to apply was she said that she didn't talk on the phone when she was going from place to place. Like I think she rides trains and stuff where she could check emails and texts. So I thought, if I don't talk on the phone while I'm driving, which is usually when I save it, because I think, oh, that's a good use of time.
Right.
But she said it's just good for your brain to have some free time sometime. Like that's when some thoughts come, new thoughts, or you can run things over in your mind. But if you're always having stuff coming in, you just never have that time.
Right, right. That's why people get like thoughts in the shower. Because usually we don't have anything else going on. And so our brain can finally get a thought.
Right.
So how did this month go? How did this month go with these goals that you had? Mindy, you had quite a few goals. Why don't you give us a quick run through on how they went?
Okay. Well, I loved giving my best to Bryce. There was a project that he needed help with at work. I made it a priority to drop the things that I had going. And I went into the work and I met with some of his employees, and they really just wanted to run some ideas by me. Somebody thinks I have a good eye for decorating.
Oh, nice.
They're redoing their cafeteria. So just like paint colors and, looking at design and lighting and spacing and tables and chairs and all that fun stuff. And that was just a lot of fun to think, okay, like I'm really doing what I want to do here. I'm giving Bryce my best by helping him. And it's something he needs at work.
That's great.
We were intentional with some time. Our boys were all at church at the same time. So we had a date night. So that was just a lot of fun. The getting enough sleep. I have really enjoyed ending my night at like 9 o'clock, and I'll read in my room. I love to read before I go to bed. But I noticed that if I wasn't getting up to my room until 10, then I'm reading till like 10:30 or 11. So by shortening my night just has been really restful in a sense that I couldn't have imagined not adding now that extra time to go to bed.
Sure.
Having more adventures in the dark and the cold. This has been kind of freeing because we tend to be a little lazy when we're at home and we sit a lot more. And it's just like, we don't want to get out, when it's freezing cold outside.
Sure.
But I mean, we went to see Grant at Chick-fil-A multiple times to have dinner. And it just creates more interaction with the kids too. Like when we get out and do something, because when we're in the house, we go our separate directions.
Mm-hmm.
We're not interacting as much. So we went out to eat a few more times. It did cost a little more to have adventures in the dark and the cold, but it was totally worth it. Time with the kids, interaction. Keeping a good margin was amazing, as you guys both can testify. Allowing myself to be able to have meaningful conversations. Even yesterday, my friend and Katie and I just impromptu were able to go to the outlets and have coffee and even a little Bible study in Starbucks. And while we're sitting there talking about Isaiah 1 and we're talking about parenting and all this stuff, when we're finished, the lady next to us says, I truly loved listening to you girls talk about the Bible. And she said, I really needed that. And if I had not had the margin, and Katie too, like we really encouraged this mom. We prayed over her. She's having trouble with her 15-year-old daughter. And that was like the best gift in my day, was because I had free time. We impromptu went and did that.
Yeah.
So the practicing self-control really was probably the biggest change to my entire month. I'm going to mention Tiana Blaisdell again. We had a phone conversation that really was somewhat life-changing for me. We both are trying to be healthy, and she talked to me about intermittent fasting. And we have talked on this podcast before about being a moderator or an abstainer.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that when I tried to moderate, I said, I really want to moderate. I can't seem to do it. I struggle with it. It's hard. Well, intermittent fasting completely fits with my abstainer self. And I decided to give it a try. Being an abstainer, I can say, I just don't eat until 1:00. And then I stop eating at 6:30. And so I don't have to have self-control and limit every meal. I'm eating what I want between the hours of like 1 and 6:30.
Yeah.
Mentally, I feel successful. Like it fits with how I do things.
Well, that's great.
I've read about that because my trainers talked to me about that. And I thought, I'd have to have my eating time from like 4 to 10 at night. I would have a really hard time not eating at that time of day.
That's when I was the snackiest, was at night. But it's given me freedom, Julie, in a way that I'm pretty surprised.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's been a really neat part of my month, was intermittent fasting.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you could come across something like that and it just kind of rings true for you and you can immediately implement it and feel some success in it,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. Julie, how did your things go this month?
I got some valuable rest by not over planning that downtime that I had when John was out of town. And I got 2 photo albums finished during that.
That's big.
That always feels very stressful to me because I'm always rushing. I'm always having problems getting the pictures to download. And I don't know, it's never a fun experience. And I usually don't even do captions, but I did captions this time. I just worked slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And it took, 3 days, but that was okay because I wasn't in a hurry. And then I have a project that I'm working on this year, and I have worked on it more regularly. Like I'm able to sit down and work on it and then walk away without it being finished. And that's really hard for me. So that's good. I'm just trying to give it little chunks of time. A couple of times this month, I got on and watched some YouTube painting tutorials, watercolor tutorials. And it was really fun because I actually learned a new technique that I could apply to something. And I made these little note cards for my daughter that she had wanted me to make.
Oh,
and
cool.
It was fun to learn something new instead of just trying to jump right to the finished product. I was like, no, I'm going to step back here and see what I can learn. So I Googled like what I was trying to learn, found a couple of videos, and I just did them. And, it took me a couple of days to get it. And then I was able to do it on a real project.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, wow.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Well, and learning something new lengthens that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's great. Well, I talked about my suffering for 15 minutes to complete 1 photo album this month. And my goal is to suffer 15 minutes until I've completed all 4 years that I'm behind. But anyways, one of my other things was just streamlining tasks. There were some things in my kitchen that I have had annoying me for years. And isn't this just the way it is? But they impact function. Last summer, I replaced all my shelf paper on a whim at Costco because I thought that it was a good deal and it looked like white shelf paper. So I emptied my whole pantry while I got into the project and I rolled it out, and it was actually like a clear opaque, which made the dark wood of my pantry shelves really show through and consequently made my pantry a lot darker than the white shelf paper I had just taken off. But you know how you get into a project and you lie to yourself and you say, oh, it'll be fine. I'll get used to it.
Yeah.
I'm moving forward now. Well, of course, here I am a few months later. I never got used to it. I didn't like it. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to order all new white shelf paper, empty the pantry again, and start over. So I did do that in January. And while I was in there, I have had so much trouble ever finding a good spot for my spices. You know, I'm not one of those people that buys a spice rack and empties them all into the uniform and then writes what they are. I have a lot of them, and they're all different sizes, and they never fit on the little shelf that I bought quite right, and they were way in the back of the pantry because you know how they always fall off those little...
Yes.
It's just an exercise in frustration. It was one of the worst parts about getting out a recipe was just thinking, do I even have that spice? And if I do, how am I going to find it? And now when I turned on my light, it was so dark in the pantry, I was shining my cell phone light back there. Where are these spices? So I thought, what else could I do? So I emptied a small cupboard over by my refrigerator, moved all my spices over to this small cupboard, and I thought, why didn't I do this 10 years ago? Like, what was I thinking? It's so much better. Every time I've cooked and had to use a spice this month, I've been so happy that I'm only looking in a little tiny space rather than trying to find them in a big pantry. So that was small, but it made my time happier. And I also had this drawer that was like a huge jumble of every serving spoon, tongs, can opener, you know, just it was a huge mess, measuring spoons. And every time I would open it, it would frustrate me. So I actually went out to TJ Maxx, bought drawer dividers, and redid it. And it just makes me happy to open that. I'm not wasting time trying to find where in the world is that item. I got rid of some items I didn't really need. So that just felt really good. And then I talked about how my favorite part of January is the feeling of wasting time that I'm allowed to, or as Julie said, the feeling of not needing to be productive. But I'm going to talk about what I did in that time during our I'm a Fan section.
Okay. To be continued.
Yes. But one of the things that Gretchen Rubin did talk about, which I think is true for most moms, is the idea of guarding our children's free time. And this was a big part of the chapter. I have thought about this so many times over the course of parenting, and it's so easy to overschedule. Like as moms, we often hold the key to how we spend time as a family. And I wanted to ask you, Mindy and Julie, how you guys have prioritized time for your kids and family over the years. Like, what was your framework for deciding whether or not to participate in an activity or add another thing to someone's schedule? Like, how did you make those decisions?
Each season was different, you know, and then your kids are different. But we had certain rules that were pretty set in our family, and there's just a couple of those, and then the rest of it you just kind of like gauge the health of everyone and how you're doing, because you know when you're running ragged and feel haggard and that you know everybody's stressed, and then you're like, okay, we need to slow down. Well, a couple of rules that we've had as a family unit up to this point, and they may change as we grow children out of the house. But we decided early on that we were not going to do any travel sports teams. We are a big sports family. However, we knew that if we dedicated the kind of time and money that it would take for one of our children to be on a travel team, it would negatively affect our marriage because we would have to play divide and conquer a lot more. One parent would have to take a kid someplace, spend the night in a hotel for some tournament or whatever. And that would negatively affect us. Also, it felt out of balance for us to put that type of priority on sports when I wanted my kids to be able to still, go to youth group and go to church on Sunday mornings and things like that. And so that's just one rule that we had, was that we chose not to engage in travel sports. Like I said, that could change as we, maybe all four of us can travel together,
Sure.
now that two kids are gone or whatever. Another thing was when we have teenagers and they are driving, they're working, they might be dating someone. One simple thing was like when Abby, she wanted to go out like with her boyfriend one night. She wanted to go out with friends another night on a weekend. And we're like, well, we need to plan to have one time on the weekend for family. And so we really would talk every week about when's our family time going to be this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So those were two just things that we kept hard and fast rules on. And the rest of it, you just gauge as you go.
Right. Right.
For us anyway. I don't know. How about you guys?
Yours are really similar to ours. We really wanted to make church a priority on the weekends. So I just didn't want there to be a question like, oh, are we going to church this weekend? I never wanted that to be up for debate. Like they just knew that's where we'd be. And then we had to talk about things that might interfere with that. Because my daughter did competitive horseback riding. So horse shows are on weekends. So we let her do local shows because that would just be a Saturday, sometimes Sunday if it was a big one. And then we'd let her pick one or two out of town shows because we didn't want one kid's activity to dominate the others. I didn't want to be dragging the whole family to all of these things and taking up our whole weekends. And the boys didn't play competitive sports past elementary school. So that was never like a real issue, but we had decided that we wouldn't do travel sports either because we just didn't want to divide our family up. It was always easier. I was always more inclined to let them do activities if they were individual, like guitar lessons, piano lessons. They did taekwondo. So all those things could be when we wanted to do them.
Okay. Yeah.
We weren't on a coach's schedule. We weren't on somebody else's schedule. And we always left margin for youth group and church on weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's what guided us.
Yeah, I definitely agreed with the travel sports things. But one thing that I really tried to guard all through raising my kids is the dinner hour. Of course, we haven't been able to keep every activity that goes against the dinner hour away. But when we made decisions, I would fight really hard for how would this work around dinner, or when could we still be able to sit down as a family for dinner? I've never liked the feeling of, well, some people are going to eat at this time and some people are going to eat at that time. That just didn't work for the way that I wanted our family to work. I felt like we needed to sit down as much as possible, as often as possible, all together, just that time of day.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. We did that too. And it takes a lot of work to guard that hour.
It really does. It really does. Another thing that I have tried to guard against, and it's really difficult, but just homework can take over life. And I wish, too, that wasn't a part of our culture. I wish that our kids would go to school during the day and their evening would be available to rest. I hate to see my kids leave at 6:30 every morning and get home at 3:30 and then have 3 hours of homework. Like, to me, that just really takes away from family life.
Yep. I totally agree with you, Marie. And I remember feeling this way. I'm like, they are my kids. Stop telling me what to do with my time with my kids. And I understood, but especially if it got excessive and the teachers weren't talking with each other to know how much they were sending home.
That was my favorite part of homeschooling because it wasn't always easy or fun, but I loved that the evenings were always ours. Like we were done. Even if it took us till 4 or 5 to get done, we were not letting anything take up the night,
Right. One thing that I've tried to do over the years is just to say, I don't really care if you have absolute straight A's. If the trade-off is that you spend every minute after school obsessing over your homework, I would rather have you be a B student and have had some kind of balance and we had some kind of enjoyable family life
because certain seasons were harder, like certain years of school were harder, certain semesters were harder. So thankfully and gracefully, time continues to move so that if you're in a tough season, typically it will let up, but you might have to reevaluate kind of what you're doing.
Looking at the seasons, Mindy, is so true because like every spring, my girls play lacrosse and it is 5 nights a week, but it is 2.5 to 3 months. Okay, fine. We can do that for that period of time. If I saw that that was going to be 9 months of the year, then no. You can kind of evaluate, do we get other times of the year where this balances out, or is this thing taking over our entire lives?
My son Grant has gotten in trouble from a couple of coaches because we were non-negotiable on our family time. And there was a tournament he missed over spring break one time because we had a family trip planned, and he actually got in trouble from the coach. And I was furious. I was like, it's not his fault. It's my fault. And if you want to get mad at somebody, you bring it to me and I'll tell you how I feel too. But
well, and I think that sets a good example by telling that to Grant and watching you do that, Mindy, because you have to deal your whole entire life with saying, hey, this is how we're going to prioritize our family time. And for Grant to see you make hard choices as a teenager will only prepare him for that later.
I hope so. I hope so.
Good job, Mindy.
Well, people will take if you give.
Yeah.
Right.
But people will respect if you have a boundary. And I think if you can be consistent with your boundary, then people are like, they're fine with it because you're consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got to be consistent.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we look back on time this month, is there anything that struck you guys that you'd want to share with listeners? A word of advice, something that you discovered to be true for yourself? Julie, I think you had something to share.
Yes, she talked about in the section, Guard My Children's Free Time. She had a lot of different topics in there, but she mentioned that we often enjoy activities more when we're good at them. But being good at something doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll enjoy it. So the flip side. And in fact, sometimes being good at something can kind of mask our enjoyment of it. And I thought this really hit me because she was really good at lawyerly work, but it took a few years to realize, this is not really what I want to do. And she made a career change. And I kind of thought back on my college days. I was good at chemistry, biology, math. So that's kind of what I went into. And if I had to pick a career today, I probably wouldn't pick the one that I chose. And it wasn't like I made it a lifelong career anyway, but I would have definitely gone a different route. And a really good example happened in our house last month. David came to us during finals week, and he was wanting to change his major. And this is 2 years into college. When he started college, he started at community college, and he didn't really know what he wanted to do, but he chose chemistry because that kind of came easy for him, and he just had to pick a path. It seemed like a natural fit. But as time went on, I knew he wasn't passionate about it. I knew that he just wasn't really excited about it, and it was really hard work. He was putting in a lot of time. We even had an aptitude test done for him, which the results showed kind of that he had more artistic aptitudes. And I thought, well, he plays the guitar for fun. He does not sing at all. He does not draw. He does not paint. He never wants to be in a play. Where does that leave him? How could it be artistic? Well, he is now a film production major. He is loving it. And I can totally see it now looking back, that is an artistic endeavor. It's not your typical one that you might think of, but he's loving screenwriting. He has always hated to write, but he said, this is fun. And he's taken a cinema aesthetics class. He's doing editing. It's just been really neat to see that. Later on in the chapter, she mentions that as parents, we really want to see our kids safely settled into the world. But sometimes that desire to keep them productive and safe can be dangerous. And what she meant by that was that, a lot of kids will start out in the safe parent approved track, only to find out later that what they're doing, they're not happy doing. I think as parents, sometimes we just don't know how to direct our children. Like there's just
Sure.
I don't know. It's hard to expose them to a lot of different career options. And, you just tend to say, well, go with the safe route, go what you're good at. And I'm just glad and thankful that David was brave enough to come to us and kind of experience this now while the consequences weren't so great. He was a little embarrassed about, wasting college money, college dollars and time. And, I said, you went to community college 2 years. You saved us a ton of money.
Right.
And, you're a little behind now, but better now than when you were 35 or 40.
That's right.
Sure.
So that was just a really good lesson. And I'm glad we got to kind of see that come full circle.
That's a great example, Julie. That's really good.
Yeah, it is.
Mindy, is there anything that stuck out in your mind that you'd want to share with listeners?
I think I would just like to encourage listeners. There's always room for recovery. There's always a second chance. The Lord offers us new mercies every morning. And so I think that the thing that I would want to share is that if you are looking at your life and you are thinking, I'm just really not feeling successful, happy, things are not going the way I want them to go, I think I would want you to know that there's room to change that. There's an opportunity to change that. If you've crashed and burned today, tomorrow's a new day. You can start taking a different step in a different direction to have a different result.
That's right.
15 minutes a day, even if that's all you're devoting to it.
Can we just not call it suffer?
Yes. How about
we need to change that.
Work for 15 minutes.
That word suffer is just really difficult for me to deal with.
Yeah. Well, as I was looking back and thinking about time in this chapter, this wasn't in the chapter, but it reminded me of how I have prioritized and looked at time since I graduated from high school. When I was graduating from high school, my mom shared this quote with me. And actually, when I looked it up today, the reason she shared it with me was because Barbara Bush said it in a speech in 1990, the year that I graduated from high school. But she said, at the end of your life, you will never regret not having passed one more test, not winning one more verdict, not closing one more deal. You will regret time not spent with a husband, a friend, a child, or a parent. And for me, even as an 18-year-old, that resonated with me so strongly. I just thought that is so true. And I feel like the choices that I've made in my life, in the back of my mind, I've always kept that quote. Like when I pursued a degree, it was a degree that would allow me flexibility if I wanted to stay at home. When I made decisions on whether or not I was going to work or stay at home or work part-time, I always kept in mind, well, if I died tomorrow, which one would I regret? Now, this is my personality to think about something like that. Other people might not want to think about that, but to me, and just because someone makes those choices, that doesn't mean that my choice would be right for everyone. And I know that I've been privileged to even have the opportunity to make a choice. But it has stuck in the back of my mind that the things that I would regret is the time not spent with people and my children and my parents. Even when I moved to Tennessee, I wanted to be near my family. I felt like at the end of my life, I would regret not having made the move to be near family. Sure, it would be hard. Sure, I wasn't that eager to do it, but I knew the ultimate thing was that someday I would be sad that I hadn't done it, So I don't know. That quote has just kind of stuck in my mind and impacted the decisions that I've made over the years.
That's love great. That. Yes. Thanks for sharing that, Marie.
And I've heard studies done on people that were interviewed, on their deathbeds. And you're right. None of them ever say, I wish I'd made more money. I wish I'd had a bigger house. I wish I'd gone on more vacations. They never say that. It's, I wish I'd spent more time with these people.
Right. But it's okay to say, I wish I spent more time with these people on vacation, though, right? I could say that.
Well, and the ironic part is, if anyone knows me, I don't want to spend 24/7 with my people.
No.
I am the very first mother to say, okay, we've spent plenty of time together. Now I need time by myself. I am not a lay down on the floor and you walk all over me type of person.
No, you're not.
But you have the option.
Right. I still do prioritize that. It still is extremely important to me, so anyways.
Yeah. That's what makes you real and relatable. And that's why we're friends.
All right. Well, I loved this chapter on time, and I'm interested to see what we'll do with time this year. We'll have to revisit this a little bit later and see how some of the goals that we set forth worked out. But before we end today, we need to get to our I'm a fan. So, Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
Ironically, I'm a huge fan of The Passage of Time because today's my birthday.
Happy birthday, Mindy.
Okay.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. And the reason I'm celebrating, I'm 41 today, and last year was hard. It was really hard. It was depressing. I had just moved to a new place. My first child had just moved out and we left her 11 hours away, and we're in a little townhouse and it was dark and cold and lonely. And I kept thinking when I turned 40, like, if I had just been in Tennessee, I'd have all these friends. I'd have this massive, huge party and we'd have a blast. And here I am in a place where I don't know anybody and I'm totally alone. And my daughter's just moved out and this is awful. So today at 41, I'm totally celebrating that hard season is over. I'm so thankful to be where we are right now. Everyone is thriving. And I'm just glad that hard seasons pass and that there are new seasons to behold. And I'm just really happy where I'm at today.
That's
so 41,
awesome.
Here I come. I'm so much happier with you. 40, you can just go into a closet and hide yourself.
Yeah, sometimes we don't want time to stand still, do we?
No.
Yeah. What a difference a year can make, you know?
Yes.
And happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
All right, Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
Trader Joe's Latin style black bean soup.
Ooh.
It comes in the tall carton. I had never had it. It was in my cupboard. I had bought it and had never opened it, never tried it. And I had a friend over for lunch yesterday and I thought, okay, I'm going to pull this out. And it's kind of not appetizing. It looks like a melted chocolate bar in your soup bowl. There are no whole beans in it.
Okay.
It's really creamy and thick, and it was it was really spicy. It was the best thing. And I put cheese and a little sour cream. You can put cilantro. And I made a grilled cheese with the Trader Joe's sourdough bread. It was
yum.
really good on a cold day. So I'll be buying more of that.
I did try that. That was one of my things because I love black bean soup. It was really good though, Julie. I really enjoyed it.
I bet that was awesome. And of course, I love all grilled cheese with sourdough bread. So that sounds like a winning combination.
Yes, it was.
All right. Well, I am a fan of something that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. So every January, I think just about, I don't consciously do this, but as I look back on several Januaries, I think every January I binge watch something. Like I'll pick a series. It might be one that I've seen before and I might start at the beginning and go to the very end, or it might be a new one. But it got to be about January, I don't know, 4th or 5th or 6th when the kids went back to school. And I was like, well, what am I going to give myself to binge watch this month? And my parents had been recommending this show to me for several months. And I was like, there is no way I am watching that show. It sounded so boring. So it was in French. Okay. And it's English subtitles. And I thought, I am not going to enjoy that one bit. Why did they keep on telling me that, Marie, you would love this? But I said to myself, I'll see if that show's on Amazon Prime and try it out. So anyways, it's called A French Village, and it's a long-running drama showing how the German occupation of France during World War II affected the ordinary residents of one small village. You guys, I love it. I have watched up to 5 in a day. Okay, wow. I have seriously been wasting time. I have to get to the end. And I never even watch shows with like the subtitles on them, even to help me, even if it's English. Some people will be like, oh, it's a British accent. I'll turn on the subtitles. I don't like that going across the screen. I forget that people are even speaking French. Their emotion, the storyline, everything is so interesting to me. As I said, it's about Central France during World War II, and it is about a village that's occupied by the Germans, and there's weakness, courage, greed, love. It's about how a community taken over by a brutal, conquering power survives. And it's not about the war at all. It's all about the agonizing choices people face when survival means treachery, and resistance, torture, and death. Now, some people are like, why would you want to watch that? It is so interesting. Like, history to me is so interesting, and the things that people do during different time periods. And you think, well, would I have done that? Well, what would I have been driven to do? Or what choice would I have made? Or it is just fascinating. So anyways, it's called A French Village. All 5 of the first seasons are on Hulu for free. Amazon Prime only has a few of them for free. And then I'm actually going to sign up for a free trial of this, I think it's like a Danish channel, to watch the last 2 seasons, because I think I'll be able to finish them in a week, and I have to see it. I have to.
Wow.
I have to know how it ends. Well, we're coming up on February, and I'm going to finish this series by the time February 1st comes, and then I will not be binge watching anything else.
No more wasting time in February.
Because that's a short month, only 28 days. There's no time to waste. All right. Well, I love talking with you guys today, and thanks so much for sharing how you guys take care of time. Listeners, we would love to hear from you. Anything that you've gotten out of this episode regarding time, or if you have any words of wisdom for us for time, you can always email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com or contact us on Instagram at midlifematterspodcast. Mindy and Julie, we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Bye, girls.
We're so happy you joined us today. If you'd like to get the show notes for today's episode, please email your name and address to midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com and write show notes in the subject line. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.